But first, John Howard used to observe in politics that storms can come from clear blue skies. Just 2 months back, the government was comfortably ahead in the polls, with the Prime Minister basking in the glow of a strong response to the pandemic, helped in, no doubt, of course, by the massive debt-fuelled spending binge. Labor's Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese was, of course, then in trouble. There was talk of an early election as well. Those who looked carefully at the mood knew coming out of the acute stage of the pandemic meant things were always going to get a bit harder for the government. The end of JobKeeper, for one, was always going to create economic pain with consequences for the government's standing. Indeed, forget everything else that happened today, including the reshuffle that I'll get to in a moment. People losing their jobs over the weekend now that the money's run out. That's been the only real talking point on radio and elsewhere across the country. The coalition was always going to face a fight chasing a fourth term. And a critical part of this, of course, was the challenge of coming up with a reason to be re-elected other than saying we're not Labor, especially as Labor has been smart enough to now strip out the threatening policies from last election. But 6 weeks of non-stop turmoil over alleged personal misbehaviour has exposed some deeper weaknesses. What does this government stand for? What do they want to achieve for ordinary Australians? Where is this country headed if a centre-right movement like the Liberal Party is slow to stand up on issues of values and culture? Of course, and I'll say this to my last breath, the PM's doing a reasonable job under the circumstances. On a personal level, he's a thoroughly decent man, and the coalition government is nearly always better than the alternative. But that's me, not necessarily the electorate. And voters normally seek something more than the least worst option. Most of all, what they want to see and hear is a government focused on them. But that's what's been missing most of all, given the paralysis, as Canberra has been obsessed with itself at a time when the Morrison government needs to be on the front foot, needed to fight a regenerised Labor. Take today's reshuffle. Replacing Christian Porter with Michaelia Cash is not going to make the government stronger. Now, it won't make it more vulnerable, but given where it is in the polls and the torrid start of this year, strength is what's needed now more than ever. Cash, she's energetic, she's articulate, although as yet lacking Porter's substance. But she now has the more important role because, as even Porter admitted today, with the legal action on foot to defend his reputation, his position as the nation's chief law officer was untenable. Putting Peter Dutton into defence, well, it's a great start for our military preparedness. It means we might finally get a reassessment of those terrible French-built submarines, and Defence really does need a heavyweight minister, at this time in our history of a rising great power tension. His replacement in the Home Affairs portfolio, Karen Andrews, well, she's been a very solid performer in industry. I reckon she'll turn out to be a safer pair of hands than the PM's political bestie, Stuart Robert, who was rumoured for the job. Instead, Robert gets Michaelia Cash's old job in employment, while Linda Reynolds slides sideways into a rebadged human services portfolio. Now, I think we can all thank God that Robert didn't get the Home Affairs gig, and that because of it, he's been kept out of the National Security Committee of Cabinet, given he was forced to resign from the ministry under Malcolm Turnbull for probity reasons after a trip to China. That Robert was even put back into Cabinet just shows it's who you know in politics, not what you know, or even how you perform for some. Maybe the robo-debt schmozzle was a can he had to carry for the government, but the COVID Safe app was certainly his responsibility. This was an app, you'll remember, costing more than $66 million to develop and then advertise, and that so far, as reported today, has helped uncover just 17 COVID cases. That's it, 17 out of thousands. If you can believe it, this app is still costing taxpayers $100,000 a month, and it's done nothing to stop the whole of Brisbane being locked down as announced today, and state border controls coming back into force. Honestly, all this at a time the government's spending millions on cut-price air tickets to get us all out and travelling, to get tourism back on its feet. We've got Brisbane going into lockdown today, days out from the lucrative Easter weekend. See what I mean about front bench talent? There are too many people in the parliament who've hardly lived outside the political bubble, and those who pretty clearly lack the temperament and maturity to add much to our public life. They've all been promoted, many of them, yet we've still got people like the retired General Jim Molan on the backbench. Go figure. And even those with some experience, life experience, decent experience, people like Andrew Lamming, an ophthalmologist, a medical doctor before he came into politics, well, he's a case in point. Often prone to inexplicable lapses in judgment, Lamming's now quitting politics, and so he should. Part of this, as I said before, is the careerists' tendency to put preferment before principle and to focus on getting a promotion rather than doing well in the job they have. But in all the moves and detail in today's reshuffle announcement, it was this comment from the PM that again exposes the government's real problem. That in trying to deal with the past 2 months, the so-called women's problem, frankly, has made a bad situation worse.
Minister Payne will effectively become the leader of that group of women. She is effectively, amongst her female colleagues, the Prime Minister for women, holding the prime ministerial responsibilities in this area as the Minister for Women. It is her job to bring together this great talent and experience across not just the female members of my cabinet team and the outer ministry and executive, but to draw also in the important contributions, especially in areas such as health and services and aged care and other key important roles that go so much to women's wellbeing in this country.
This is where, as a Conservative, I get the angriest. I want the PM of my country to be the PM for women as much as the PM for men. I don't want Marise Payne or any other female MP to do that job. I expect the Prime Minister to lead for all, and I hope I live long enough to see a female PM elected at a general election, not installed by factional warlords, as Julia Gillard was. I hope one day we never even have a woman's portfolio or a minister for women. I take umbrage today at the government even creating this women's safety role. Please, we don't want to be separate or distinct or different. Women's safety is everyone's safety. Have a safety portfolio if you must, PM, but don't carve out women as separate. Our whole history has been about being left out of the mainstream, when what real equality is not to be different, or for our issues to be separated out from the rest of the cabinet portfolios. You know, I deliberately never worked in a so-called women's area of government. I never worked in a portfolio like social services or women's issues. That's because I argued uphill and down dale that every portfolio area is and should be relevant to women. Immigration is a women's issue. The economy is a women's issue. Foreign affairs, defence, they're all women's issues. Every issue in government is an issue that matters as a women's issue. I don't know why, but the PM keeps making these fundamental mistakes on women. And quotas, as we've now heard being talked about again today within the New South Wales Liberal Party. Quotas as an issue is no different. What we want as women, particularly women on the centre-right, is to be treated as equal, to be treated on our merits. No more, no less, because anything else doesn't take us forward. It divides us. And quite honestly, PM, the sooner you get off this issue and onto the concerns facing ordinary households that tonight are trying to get their lives back on track out of this pandemic, the better for you and the better for our country.